everyone, it's Mark. I'm back for week 5. So this week at our staff meeting, which if by the way you didn't know, I run the staff meeting. I think I showed you an agenda a while back. So yeah, anyway, we talked about specifically assessment this week. We spent a good chunk of time of the staff meeting talking about how we are going to assess whether or not our programs are meeting our cornerstones. And some of the cornerstones of our residence life office are things like connectedness, global and diversity awareness, leadership development, civic engagement, integrated learning. And so what we did last week was that we sat down and we thought about types of programs that would map to these cornerstones or learning outcomes. We call them cornerstones, so I might go back and forth, but they're the same thing. And so this week we talked about how do we assess whether or not a program is really getting at, say, connectedness. What does connectedness mean? What does connectedness look like? And I just think back to class when we talked about creating assessment pieces, and when we create programs, how do we assess them, and making sure that they're something we can measure, something that we can show people that, hey, one person was at this point, now they're at this point, and this is the learning outcome that this was mapped to, and here's how we accomplished it. The CAs, when we were talking about assessment, they asked a lot of the questions that I know I was asking myself, and that some of us asked in class. It's like, well, how can you measure something like learning? How can you measure how connected someone is? And so, like, me now kind of being on the other side where, they're asking, me and the assistant director and the director these questions, I find myself like, answering in a way that I know is true to students there, but also at the same time that's also true to myself, because I like to think of like creative ways to assess how connected we are, in ways that will also like fit the environment as well, because I could think of how I've learned about assessment where I've been at Penn State, but this isn't Penn State, and so something like a survey or something very standard that may be used at Penn State might not work here. And so, for instance, like assessing something like connectedness at Indiana University Southeast, it may be something like when the CAs are on rounds, like just think how many people are out in the great room on average for the week, like how many people are out there talking, socializing, how many people have their doors open on any given night. Just creative ways to assess like whether or not students feel like they're more a part of the community. And so like that's how I kind of like, bouncing around ideas, answering a question, that in a way that is going to create something measurable. Like you can count and see like, how many people are out, socializing and talking and playing cards, on average, for the month of September, say. Or, how many people, are out, have their doors open for the month of October, or how many people are in the study lounge studying together on average, things like that, just to show like whether or not people are feeling that they belong in the community. Also like asking questions like at the beginning of the semester, how many people do you feel that how many people do you feel like that you can talk to, assessing at the beginning of the semester, then at the end of the semester, asking the same question to see if, to see if we've met this outcome. Especially if, you ask a question like that at the beginning of the semester, and then you do a couple programs like throughout the month or throughout the semester that are meant to foster connectedness. And then if at the end of the semester students are feeling either more or less connected, you can see, okay, well, what is this program doing? What do we need to change? What's the feedback? So that's what we talked about, and that's how we talked about it. I really tried to keep it true to this institution, and just think of things that I know will work for the students that we're working with. And so it was very, very fruitful discussion. So even though we had, there was a lot of deep thought, a lot of, internal reflection about, okay, well, how do you actually assess something like connectedness, or how do you assess global awareness or civic engagement? And we thought of a lot of creative ways. It could be like how many students are involved in organizations on campus, how many students are leaders on campus at the beginning of the semester as opposed to the end of the semester. Are things changing in that regard? How many service hours or volunteer hours are people doing before this program, and then after we do a couple of programs about civic engagement and service learning, how many people now are getting involved more off campus or on campus volunteering. So we talked about a lot of great ways to assess how our program can map to our cornerstones. And so, next week we're going to try and put down on paper like some concrete, like what it's going to look like. Is it going to be in like a survey format? Are we going to add it to our current program assessment form? Are we going to make something new? So getting down to the nuts and bolts of it. And so I just really think about a lot of the discussion we had in class about learning outcomes and things like that, and my personal feelings about setting learning outcomes and setting parameters around learning, and as opposed to letting learning happen organically. Well, then how do you measure it? So I'm slowly coming to a happy medium with that. Of course, I still ask the question, okay, well, how can you truly measure something like learning, or whether or not someone has become more globally aware? Like, how do you physically measure that? And the idea of setting forth something that we want students to learn, and then but also getting at the idea of well, what do students want to learn, and giving them that agency to say, okay, this is your experience too. And so I work with that, and I'm working with it. So this week was kind of an assessment type week, and thinking about those things. Don't think I forgot about the social justice thesis. I'll show you guys that. Probably I want to show you guys a final product, so that way it's not just bits and pieces here and there. So I'm getting that together, talking with my supervisor and getting feedback on those things. So yeah, that's what's been going on this week. So yeah, can we hear from you guys? I have been I've been looking at things, so I say can't wait to hear from you, but you know what I mean. All right.